Jenny Lee with us today, who will be managing our chat feature. In terms of our interactive portion for this webinar, please open the chat feature in the Zoom platform to interact and ask questions. If for some reason you get disconnected from our presentation, please use the same Zoom link to re-enter. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change can help you prepare to implement quality and continuous improvement initiatives in an organization. Furthermore, we have a Ph.D. program in workforce education and development with a concentration in human resource development and organization development. Our program has created a continuous 6-series monthly webinar from experts around the world. Today, we welcome Dr. Rothwell.
Dr. William Rothwell is a professor of workforce education and development on the University Park campus of Penn State University. There he leads a graduate specialty in organization development. He had 20 years of full-time HR/OD experience before arriving at Penn State in 1993. He has authored 112 books and served as a consultant for 50 multinational companies. A frequent traveler, he has visited China 83 times since 1993. Here's Dr. Rothwell.
Thank you very much, Layla and Jenny, for the wonderful introduction. And I'm delighted to present the first in a, we hope, continuing sequence of monthly webinars. And I am speaking on a topic that I have presented on, consulted on, keynoted conferences on around the world. And that topic, of course, is talent management and succession planning as organization development and change efforts. So this topic has garnered some recent interest because many organizations and the leaders of those organizations are concerned about what will happen to the leadership of their organizations in the wake of the current coronavirus pandemic. So there are many people who are wondering, do we have the talent we need to continue our organizations? So I have published many books, and I'll talk about those for you in a moment, but we do have an agenda, and I have found, I've done many webinars, and I have found that my participants particularly value knowing what the structure of the presentation will be. So we'll talk a little bit about myself, but in the context of that, I will also be raising some questions for you to be thinking about relative to your own organization and whether your organization is really prepared with a succession plan, a replacement plan, and a talent management program to weather the challenges that the current virus is likely to present to so many organizations. So I'll be saying a little more about that. We will talk about some key terms, and talent management, succession planning are areas where there are many specialized terms, and this gives rise to much confusion among managers and even human resource people who may not have received appropriate training in their academic background to be able to facilitate the special kind of change effort that replacement, succession, and talent management programs represent. We'll talk in part 3 about some important facts and figures so that you get a sense of the lay of the land. Basically, what is the current situation globally in organizations with succession planning and talent management. In part 4, we'll be talking about how we relate talent management and development to workforce planning and succession. I want you to understand conceptually how these terms are related and what we might do with those in an organization. And that's pretty important. And then in part 5, we'll talk about some models to guide talent management and organization development. Now, the word model is a bit off-putting. When people hear that word, they sometimes think that we are talking academic theory. That is not at all what we are doing in my use of the word models. To me, a model represents a step-by-step project guide of exactly how to implement an effective program. And I can't think of anything more practical than that. A roadmap that tells you how to get from where you are to where you need to be. That's the way I use the word model. And then in part 6, we'll have an overview summary of the entire presentation, and I will open it up to some questions and answers, and Jenny will help me facilitate those questions appearing in the chat box. So of course, I told you I've written many books, and I'm telling you about these because I want you to be thinking about some of the issues that these books represent. The books represent my research, but also come from my practical experience in the human resource field. The book on the left is probably my most famous. Notice it's currently in a 5th edition. And that book has been the foundation for the succession planning programs of at least 50 multinational companies and countless governments around the world. And I mention that because the book talks about one key question, which is, does your organization have the adequate framework of policies and procedures in human resources to support an effective succession plan? And frankly speaking, my experience has been many organizations do not have that framework. The book in the middle, The Leader's Daily Role in Talent Management, stems from my work with companies that are very famous in talent management, but it turns out they have an Achilles heel, which is they may have a fabulous strategic framework for succession planning and talent management, but they are lacking in managers being willing to cultivate talent on a daily basis. You know, the biggest person who has the most influence on a worker's development is that worker's boss. And we value work experience because that shapes the skills that the worker has to go forward. But if managers don't know how to develop talent and they don't know how to get people prepared for promotion, then when the time comes, we will have no one ready. And so the book is a guide on what a manager should do day to day to build their own staff and not blame human resources if the job isn't getting done. And the book on the right is what your role as an individual is in succession. And I have found that very often a lot of people have not thought about their career goals, and many leaders assume that everyone wants a promotion. Well, I'm here to tell you that the Gallup organization did a survey some years ago during the height of the last crisis, the financial crisis, and with a statistical sample of the entire US workforce, they asked workers, would you take your boss's job if it were offered to you today? And 72% of the entire US workforce said no. They would not take their boss's job. So that begs the question, what do we do to get talented people ready to step up and take more responsibility? And I fault organizations for those problems, but that could be the topic of another conversation. I've written many other books on this topic. A step-by-step guide on talent management. The book in the middle, Invaluable Knowledge, is about how we transfer technical knowledge from knowledge workers like engineers, IT professionals, research scientists, from those who have it to those who don't. How do we transfer what's in the head of an engineer with 30 or 40 years of company work experience when they get ready to sail out the door to retirement, or before we lose them to a hospital trip because of a virus? The book on the right addresses another practical problem that comes up. Often managers think that when they're about to lose one of their best talented people to retirement or resignation, they clutch their hearts and say, oh my God, I have only two choices: promote from within or recruit from the outside. Well, the book on the right talks about the fact that that way of thinking about it is dead wrong, because it paints us into what people in the fields of logic would say is an either-or fallacy. Promote or recruit. There's actually a third option, which is do something else. Re-engineer the job, automate the position, offshore the work, outsource the work, have consultants do part of the work. The book lists 100 things we can do to get work done without promoting and without hiring anybody. And that very much relates to talent management. I've also written many books relevant to organization development, a special approach to change, facilitated change, as opposed to authoritarian imposed change. So in OD, we involve the people who have a stake in the change itself. And we'll have more to say about that as we proceed through today's session. I always like to begin my webinars with a poll or two. And the purpose of these polls is not to make you vote, but rather to get you to think about the status of your own organization. So my first poll is, how many of your organizations are just now thinking about exploring the implementation of a succession or talent management program? You're just now thinking about it. How many of your organizations have had a program that has functioned for a year or so? How many of you have had a program that's between 2 and 4 years old? And how many of you would say that your organization's succession or talent program is well aligned with global best practice and would match up and could easily compete with companies famous for this, like GE or others? So you see what I'm saying? I'm trying to get you to think about which group you're in. The reason I ask those questions is that it's been my experience that when I give talks on this topic, which I have done on every continent except Antarctica, I find that my audience falls into those 4 groups. Most of the time, there are people who show up and they want to know how to get started. Or there are people who show up and their organization launched a program a year or so ago and it disappointed them. And they come to my session to figure out what went wrong. And a third group shows up because they want to hear new ideas. They come equipped to think about how their organization matches up to the world's best. And so I try to not disappoint anyone in my presentations, and I will try not to disappoint you. The second opening poll, how many of your organizations are only thinking about reviewing your replacement or succession plans in light of the virus or the pandemic? How many of you have already reviewed your replacement or succession plans? If you are a daily reader of the Wall Street Journal, I bet you have noticed that this topic has come up more than once in the Wall Street Journal, reminding business leaders that it's important to make sure that they have dealt with the unexpected loss of key people or the incumbents in key positions. So it's something for you to think about. Have you done this for your organization? Moving on, my overview of today's talk. I only have an hour before we open it to Q&A, and I have many topics to cover because I have written and researched and consulted so much in this space that I'm going to try to pack in as much as I can in a very short period of time. So we'll talk about what do we mean by the term talent. I have to tell you, the first time I heard the phrase talent management, I burst into laughter. I said, what are we now? Hollywood talent scouts? What are we, Hollywood talent agents? Well, it turns out there's actually some truth to that, because did you know that according to the research, as much as 40% of the total stock value of a multinational company hinges on the personal reputation of their CEO? Let me say that again. 40% of the entire stock value of a multinational company hinges on the personal reputation of the CEO. If you don't think talent is important, think about that. What would be 40% of the total global stock value of Microsoft or of GE or of Xerox or of IBM? You get my point. So talent is important. What is talent management and talent development? How do these differ from and overlap with succession planning? Why do we care about these programs? And how do we go about implementing them using a method like organization development? So any good trainer has targets or objectives to meet. My targets are simple since we only have an hour to talk, but I will spend the time talking about some of the definitions of terms, why these are important topics, talent management and succession planning, particularly today with the pandemic forcing a lot of organizations to wonder what next. Review some of the ways we might be able to implement a succession or talent program using different approaches to change. And that will be my goal in this short presentation. So in the next part, I'll get into these terms and I'll talk about why we care about these key terms. And we do care about terms because it's been my experience that a management meeting can easily descend into an argument over the meaning of words. What do we mean by a succession plan? What is a replacement chart? Why do we need a competency model in a succession program? What do we mean by a human capital management effort, and how does that relate to anything? What is knowledge transfer? My point here is that there are many special terms that come up when we talk about succession and talent issues. And if we're not careful, our thinking can be clouded through the conceptual confusion that results if we don't get our terms clear. So terms help us build shared understanding. Getting clear on the terms and how we use those terms is a change effort in itself. And I advise my clients to develop a one-page glossary of terms and put short definitions and hand those out and get management on the same page so they know exactly what terms mean, rather than having false arguments over what they are. And terms can build and shape our expectations. If you don't believe me, think about this. I had an experience working in a unionized organization, and when the phrase succession planning came up, the union representatives thought that meant that the good old boys in the headquarters were going to pick their favorite people, and that women and minorities and other people would not even be considered because they weren't the yes men of the organization. And so if that's the way we misunderstand terms, the definitions can be important to shaping expectations. And that can lead in some cases to sources of resistance. Think about these words. What do we mean by talent, talent management, talent development, succession planning, organization development? I actually did a research study and surveyed 1,000 companies about how they defined the term talent. And I came back with a long list of different correct definitions. And this is important because depending on the way we understand the word talent, it can affect the way we implement our talent program. If we have a different idea of what we mean by talent, you can imagine it will shape what we do to try to attract talent, develop talent, retain talent, engage talent, and deploy talent. So first, we need to get clear on what the heck we mean by the word talent. And it turns out there are many possible meanings of the word talent. Think about your own definitions before I give you some of mine. Talent could mean job performance. Talent could mean promotion potential. Talent could mean both job performance and promotion potential. Talent could mean your individual strengths, what you do best, better than anyone else, your competitive advantage. Talent could mean your special knowledge that you possess that other people don't have. Talent could refer to special social relationships. Maybe you've got the closest relationship to our key company customer. If you do and we lose you, you can imagine what could happen to that relationship with a customer. Do you see how the term talent could actually have many useful but different meanings, and how those could shape our understanding of talent management and talent development? So those are important. Succession planning to me is all about developing people for higher levels of responsibility. And there's actually two ways you could be promoted if we have a dual career path system. One way is, of course, up the org chart and manage more people. That's the traditional view of promotion. But there's a second idea of promotion, which many knowledge workers actually prefer, and that is to develop a broader and/or deeper understanding at your same level on the organization chart. So it might be a nurse who has toured all of the hospital departments and has a huge breadth of experience. Or it could be a nurse who is a specialist in one area of medicine, like, say, anesthesiology or obstetrics or geriatrics. And so succession is about getting people prepared, to move to next higher levels of either responsibility or professional ability. So in part 3, let's talk briefly about why we care about some of these issues. What are some of the key facts and figures you need to be aware of, and why do these underscore the need to manage change effectively? I'm not going to cover all of the text on this slide, but I will focus on a couple of key points. 62% of workers said that they would be more engaged if they thought their company had a succession plan. 94% felt that a succession plan would encourage engagement at other levels. 90% of younger workers say that a succession plan would improve their level of engagement and will also affect their view of how well qualified senior management is to manage the organization. That's important because there is research that indicates that if workers lack confidence in the ability of their senior leadership, they will turn into turnover statistics. Because who wants to stay with a company that headed for bankruptcy? Nobody. So it's important to build the expectation that we're well managed, and a succession program can help do that. 79% of employers surveyed note they have succession in place for mid-level managers. And of course, often we argue over, well, how far down should a succession plan go? Should it just be a so-called top of the house plan where we look at the CEO and his or her direct reports? Or should it cascade down? And we can even have a succession plan that goes beyond entry level and looks at talent pools outside the organization. And that's common in some industries because we want to cut the unproductive time it takes to fill positions. That's an important goal in a lot of succession programs. And one way we measure them is how long it takes to fill positions. Did you know the average time in the United States to fill a position is 51 work days? Of course, it varies depending on level. It takes longer, obviously, to fill a CEO job than it does a janitor position. But the average is 51 work days. Well, how's the work getting done while we're out looking for someone in those 51 average days? In some organizations, it takes much longer. In government, I once talked to senior leaders. They told me the average time it takes to fill a spot in a federal agency is 2 years. Imagine that. Where does all the work go? Well, then it raises questions. Do we really need people if we can get by without them for 2 years? 81% of employers report using some kind of software. Were you aware that there is currently 1,054 software programs on the market to help conduct organizational succession and talent programs? You could spend your whole career just looking at the software. And by the time you finish, there would be new software and updates, and you would never finish just looking at software. But it's important because the software is a tool that helps us implement our programs. 10,000 baby boomers a day are retiring currently. Where are their replacements? And have they been developed, and are they ready to step into the job? The Association for Talent Development, ATD, did a research report that found that just 35% of organizations have a formal succession process. Well, think about that in light of the coronavirus. If only 35% of organizations know what to do if they suddenly lose their CEO to death from the virus, then how can we say that we have a well-managed organization? I don't think we can. Succession planning is about getting people identified and developed and prepared to step into important jobs in the organization. 53% of organizations don't have a plan, and the top reasons organizations have them is to clarify the route for internal advancement and to ensure that the business continues over time. We've got to have the right people in the right seats doing the right things to get the right results if we're going to keep our organization in business. So that goes to business continuity. Each year, about 10 to 15% of organizations look for a new CEO. And CEO succession and talent programs have been a major focus of research. And yet, few boards know how to go about this. In my own experience working with boards, most corporate boards are not full of HR people. They don't know the first thing about dealing with succession planning, and they depend on the current CEO to do it. And very often, no one trained those CEOs. And sometimes their HR department is filled with people promoted from within who were never properly trained on HR. And so it's the blind leading the blind. So this is a common problem. So some of the potential gains we get out of a good succession plan is a more diverse pool of talent, better decisions. You know, I did a research study and I asked CEOs of very famous companies that are known for their talent programs, how do you measure the success? How do you evaluate your succession or talent program? You know what they told me? They didn't say exactly the same thing, of course, but they did come back with a common theme, which is when we have a key position open, do we have available immediately a deep pool of well-qualified talent inside and outside the organization to consider to fill that position so that we can drive down the time it takes to fill the position? So the time to fill metric is a key way to measure the success of a program. Another key measure is the percentage of internal promotes to external hires, and that will depend on industry. So in government, we want stability, so we want a very high number of promote from withins. In a high tech firm, we need to get competitive knowledge from outside, so we want a very low number of promote from withins. So we want succession and talent to be able to think forward. What kind of talent are we going to need over time to achieve our strategic goals? And have those people been put in place so that they can help the organization achieve its targets? Here's on this slide, I want to emphasize a couple of things. The global pandemic introduces new uncertainty about our continuity of leadership. So how many organizations are prepared for a sudden loss? And there's several ways we could lose talent. One way is death, of course, but there are other ways. What if someone is in the hospital for the next 6 months? Do we have someone lined up who's capable of taking their place and making the hard decisions to keep the organization moving? About 70% of all change efforts fail, and we know that 70% of all talent and succession planning efforts fail within the first 3 years. And I could do an entire webinar just on the reasons for failure and how to avoid those. But a very common reason is we launch a succession program to solve a specific business problem, like we look at our senior executive team and see that they're all retirement eligible. And we shake our heads and then look at the middle management group and discover that they're all retirement eligible. And we have nobody inside the organization ready to step up and maintain the business continuity. So then we launch a talent program. Sometimes that's closing the barn door after the horse has already gotten out. Or another way to say it is giving first aid to a terminal patient. So it takes time to launch a good program. So getting started now and knowing why these programs fail and taking steps to avoid those common missteps is a very useful thing to do. This slide mentions on March 20, if you look it up on the web, you'll see the Wall Street Journal reported that many corporate boards are reviewing their succession programs in light of the virus. And on April 4th, the Wall Street Journal reported many CEOs were scurrying to find their own replacements out of concern over what could happen with the virus. So long-term succession plans may not be tailor-made to deal with some of the issues, that is the sudden loss of key people or the job holders in key positions, if we have not thought it through. So getting started now would be a good idea. The pandemic creates a new sense of urgency on these talent planning efforts. I would point out that one of the reasons executive coaching has gotten to be so popular in recent years, and some of you are aware of that popularity, is that it's been my experience that in some organizations that never had a good working succession program, what they do is they wait until someone is promoted and they know that person is not prepared to step up to the next level. And then they go out and they hire an executive coach, and they call it executive coaching, even though what they are really doing is on-the-job training. And so they promote example would be an executive VP of marketing into the CEO job, but the board shakes their heads and says, that person's not ready. What do we do? And someone says, why don't we hire an executive coach? Let's bring in the former president who's retired and have him or her be the coach of the person we know is not ready for the job. And the board says, yeah, let's do that. And that is one reason why executive coaching is so popular. It is a solution for organizations that are poorly managed. When they don't have a succession or talent program, they do it as need arises upon promotions of people who are not ready for the job. So, of course, there are other reasons to do executive coaching, and I don't intend to beat up on executive coaching per se. I'm just saying that sometimes it is used to hedge bets and to help give on-the-job training. But we should have had a succession or talent program in place that was systematically developing a pool of talent so that we didn't have to fall into the trap of using coaching to address these problems. So let's move on and talk about relating talent management and development to workforce planning and succession planning. So what do we mean by levels of people planning, and how do those levels relate to each other? Well, here's a diagram on the slide, and you will see a series of levels of people planning. And I don't mean to suggest that we need to have all of these in place, but it could be helpful because they do different things. So the center of this series of circles is replacement planning. And I'll have more to say about that in a moment, but replacement planning is disaster planning for people. Replacement planning answers the question, what do we do if the CEO's airplane crashes? What do we do if the CFO is stricken with the coronavirus? Do we have someone who is prepared to step up to do that work until we have the time, and it gives us time to find a well-qualified replacement from inside or outside the organization? So replacement planning is really disaster planning for people. Succession planning is the next layer out of this concentric circles. And there we move past looking within silos. In replacement planning, we often look for short-term replacements within the department or the division to take the place of the leader. But in succession planning, we start to look at whole levels. We try to look at all the middle managers that we could prepare and groom to promote to senior executive. And we try to look at the senior executives that we could prepare to promote to CEO. And we might look at the frontline supervisors that we could prepare and groom in a talent pool to get prepared to step up to middle management. You get the point. We can also apply the same logic to the horizontal career path and say, what is the level of, say, engineering knowledge we currently have in the organization, and how do we preserve that knowledge? And it might be our key competitive advantage. How do we preserve that as engineers, as a group in our company, get ready to retire? That's a big problem in a lot of major companies. The loss of tacit knowledge, what people carry around in their heads. And we can hire an engineer from the university, but that person may not have 40 years of work experience in our company with our products, our customers, our work processes, in our corporate culture. And that's what we might be faced with replacing. And so that requires special efforts. Talent management goes the step beyond succession, which emphasizes getting people developed and prepared for a next step. Talent management is often associated with attracting the best people, that's recruitment, so developing the best people, there it overlaps with succession planning, and retaining the best people. That means keeping our turnover down. And we can add other Christmas tree ornaments onto that Christmas tree. We can put employee engagement, engage the best talent. Or we can talk about deployment. Deployment means, are we keeping the right people in the right seats on the bus over time? For example, a manager might be in the same job for 20 years. Who is monitoring that? How challenging are people in their jobs if they have been doing the same job for 20 years? That has been researched in many big companies. The common rule of thumb is no longer than 7 years without a major job challenge in the same position. So it's something to think about. How do we monitor talent deployment? How do we know that we're maintaining the right people in the right seats? Workforce planning is the outermost layer, and that addresses the question of how do we plan over time for the quantity and quality of people we will need to achieve our organizational strategy. So that's comprehensive people planning. How many people and what kind of people will we need over time to achieve our strategic targets? And often, very few companies do comprehensive workforce planning. Most companies do position by position planning. When there's a vacancy, they talk about who do they need to fill the position. We write a job requisition and file it, and then we look at one person. We never consider the configuration of people, the number and the total competence of all of the workers, the total skill set of our entire workforce over time, including temps and consultants and other people who may not be full-time employees, but who do provide services to our organization. That's comprehensive workforce planning. Let's move on to some models. Again, when I use models, I'm talking about the step-by-step how to do it. There are many such models of relevance to talent management, succession planning, and replacement planning. Models help give us an idea of what to do. I start with a simple replacement chart, and this would be valuable in many organizations right now to deal with the issues stemming from the pandemic. And the way you fill this chart out is manager is any level of manager. Manager could be CEO. Manager could be middle manager. Manager could be C-suite senior executive. Manager could be frontline supervisor. And then we look at the people, typically at the very top, manager, and next to it you have rank, name, and readiness. Rank means of the people who report to that person, which one is number one to be chosen temporarily to step into the manager's job and do it while we look for a replacement. The name is the name of the person, but the readiness is a code. And it basically means how ready is that person to step in and perform all of the duties at their boss's level while we look for a suitable permanent replacement for their boss. So typically readiness could be RN, ready now, R1, which means it would take 6 months of coaching once they're promoted, perhaps executive coaching to get them fully prepared to do all the work of their boss. Or it could be R2, which would be a full year of coaching once they're temporarily promoted. So replacement charting, I've used this method many times. It's very useful as a starting point in a company that has absolutely nothing. They have no talent program, they have no succession program, and they're looking for a place to start. This is a good place to start because you get an immediate result from it, which is, in case of an emergency, who have we identified to step in long enough for us to find a replacement? It's easy to sell this approach, even to skeptical CEOs and managers who think all HR efforts are a big waste of time and money. This you can argue in favor of, and the value of this is it starts to get management to think in more sophisticated ways about their talent requirements. And often the right answer is, as managers ask these questions, the consultant or the HR person can say, well, wait a minute, there's something called succession planning that's the next step beyond this that might address that question you raised. Or there's something called talent management that goes the step beyond and addresses the issues you've raised that might be problematic in replacement planning. Here's my model to guide strategic succession planning. You notice that this is set up with a series of questions. As you answer the questions, you are building your succession plan. So at the very top, what are the measurable goals we want out of our program, and how can we make the case and keep making the case for the program? That's the first question. What do we want out of it is basically it. You might think, well, everyone knows we want successors. Well, it's more to it than that. My research shows 22 different goals that can be achieved from a succession planning program. Obviously, you can't juggle 22 balls in the air and expect to keep all the balls in the air. You're going to drop a lot of them. And that's exactly what happens if you are not selective in the goals you select. I recommend 2 or 3 maximum, and those could change over the years. But we have to deal with this moving target. You know, people are complicated. If you think computers are complicated, try dealing with human beings. The next question is, what's the work that people do? That's current job descriptions. Do we have up-to-date job descriptions? We need those to spell out what's the work. What kind of people do the work? Well, that's exactly what a competency model gives you. A job description describes the work. A competency model describes the human beings who do the work. And that makes our talent requirements very specific. And we need that if we're going to build talent. We need to know what we're building. And so the next question is, how is job performance managed? That's our performance management system. How are we grading people on their competencies and their job requirements? How can those gaps be closed if there is a gap between what the job requires or the person requires and what they are demonstrating? The next 2 questions, what is the work that people will do in the future? And what kind of people will we need? That means we forecast future job descriptions and future competency requirements. And that leads to the assessment of promotion potential. Promotion potential is how capable is the person, how ready is the person to be promoted. And we must then have a strategy to close those gaps between what is required in the future and what the person presently has, the knowledge, skills, and abilities. And that leads to individual development planning and specific efforts like leadership development programs or executive coaching to close those gaps and get the person prepared and ready for promotion. And then finally, how do we evaluate the program? Well, you tell me what are the goals in that first box at the top, and I'll tell you how to measure those goals. So if the goal is develop a pool of talent capable of moving up to senior executive to address problems stemming from our retirements in our company, then we know how to evaluate those in that final box. How many people each year do we have ready to step up to the C-suite and take over for the retiring senior executives? Tactical succession planning is about the day-to-day. Usually when managers see this model, they slap their heads and say, I don't have time to develop my people every day. I can't possibly do everything on this model every day. And I always say, no, no one expects you to. This particular model is like a buffet of food. I don't know if you like buffets. I love buffets. But in a buffet, when we walk in, we don't expect to eat every food item on the table and eat all of it. We expect to be selective at what we choose. And that's how you use this model. Every manager should work with at least one worker every day to build their capacity to move up or move across on the technical continuum. And if you did that, if every manager worked with at least one person every day And it doesn't have to be face-to-face. We've got texts and we've got email and we've got video conferencing. We can meet with our workers every day, at least one of them. We can build people's capacity. We can develop talent for the future. So this model basically is a buffet of choices. The manager picks one and does it with one person or one group of people every day. The next model is traditional talent management, and here we're talking, we add 2 boxes to the succession chart. One of those boxes is how is talent acquired? And that's the recruiting and selection issue. You know, I said talent management is often defined as attract, develop, and retain the best people. And then we add the retention box over near the last box. How is talent retained? And my research shows that talent retention is often the weakest link. Now, there's many ways we could implement those models. They give you the step-by-step, but how do we implement them? And we basically got 2 choices. We can use the organization development approach and work with people and build the change effort of installing a succession or talent or replacement program with working with our people, or we can play medical doctor and we can prescribe, we can diagnose their problems and prescribe the medicine. So OD is all about facilitated change. So we work with the people. How would that play in practice? Well, I've used this approach myself. I've used both approaches, both the play expert approach and the other approach is facilitate the change. If I facilitate the change, I might, with the permission of the CEO, I might meet with every senior executive and ask them about the succession needs in their department and what they think is going to happen and what they would like to see happen with their succession or talent program. And then we have a management retreat and we pull all those key players together and I feed back what they told me. And often we discover that management has conflicting goals. And if management can't agree among themselves on the targets, you can imagine we will never achieve the targets. So in OD, we facilitate the change by asking key stakeholders for their views. Then we feed it back to them and we help them reach agreement on their targets. And then we work with them to reach agreement on how we achieve those targets. That's the OD approach. An alternative to that is build from our strengths. And if we use that approach in succession and talent management, we might say, what do our people do best? How does that relate to our company's competitive advantage? And how do we build their competitive advantage to help us build our company competitive advantage? So there's yet another approach, I mentioned it, and that's the doctor-patient approach. And in the human resources field, we call that approach performance consulting. And I'm often asked, which should I use, performance consulting or organization development approach? And I'll say, well, what do you want? Do you want the change fast? If you want that, use performance consulting. If you want it to stick and you want a corporate culture change, then use OD approach. So the performance consulting approach, and here you see a model that represents it, and we go through these series of questions when we're trying to help a group of people do something like implement a talent or succession program. And as they answer these questions, we are building the action plan to address the problem that they have with succession or talent management. So I have covered an amazing amount of ground in less than an hour. So I am now at the summary, and we have an opportunity for some Q&A. By this point, you should have a clearer understanding of the key terms: talent, talent management, talent development, succession planning, and other terms that I brought up along the way. Explain why we should care about these programs. A lot of organizations need to look at this right now during the pandemic. And we talked about some of the ways we might implement these. Generally speaking, change specialists tend to focus on a specific area of change, and that's where they build their expertise. In my case, much of my life's work, research, writing, consulting, public speaking, has centered around succession planning and talent management. So that's the kind of change effort that I have tended to focus on. With that, I will turn to Q&A and ask Jenny to facilitate this.
Hi, Dr. Rothwell. Well, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. Since we are close to the ending of our session, we'll just cover maybe one or two of the questions that came in. So quite a few questions are around how do we assess readiness of talent to take on larger roles?
That goes to what I believe is one of the most important questions in succession and talent management, which is assessing promotion potential. And I've done a research project on that, and I have a whole list of methods that organizations actually use, but only 40% of US companies separate the performance management review, which looks at your job description and how well you're carrying it out. And only 40% have a separate review for your promotion readiness. And this is very troubling to me because it means that 60% of US company leaders think that if you do your current job well, you're guaranteed to do your boss's job well. And we know that is false. And so one of the ways that's the most popular is to ask the manager, do you feel this worker is promotion ready? Yes or no? Or we give the manager a list of competencies, and we invite the manager to rate the worker on those competencies. And if the list comes back as 80% positive, then the person is judged as ready. The problem with that is bosses can be biased. And we know from the research, men tend to be biased in favor of men. Women tend to be biased in favor of women. And this happens not because people are evil and they set out to deliberately discriminate. It happens because human beings tend to look at the world through their own frame of reference and are more comfortable with people who are like themselves. And this is why it's so important to have a separate way of assessing talent. So my personal favorite approach is not a 360 assessment, which is one way, or an assessment center, which is another way. Those are very expensive and time consuming. A much more practical approach is to ask workers to step up and do their boss's job while the boss is out sick, on vacation, or on travel status, and then complete a review on the worker when the boss returns by polling the people who observe the person's job performance. That's very practical. The military does that, but stunningly, most businesses do not do that. And so to me, the best way to prove someone can ride a bicycle is put them on the bicycle and give them a shove and see if they can pedal and maintain balance at the same time. And if they can ride the bike, then I think they're ready to go. And the same is true for assessing people's promotion potential. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you so much. Well, I would like to thank Dr. Rothwell for sharing his knowledge, expertise, and wisdom with us today. If we did not get to your question, please feel free to send us an email. And Dr. Rothwell, if you don't mind to click on one more slide so that everyone can see that email.
I'm trying, it's not going. There. Yes, we want them to come and hear Dr. Donahue.
Yes. So on behalf of our OD&C program, we hope that you found this webinar helpful. Registration for all other events can be found on our social media platforms. And please feel free to visit our website, which is on the screen, or email us with any questions. Thank you for attending today and being such a great audience with great questions. We hope to have you back on May 29th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Please feel free to share these webinar series with your networks and social media platforms, as all are invited and welcome. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Layla and Jenny.
Thank you.